Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So, as Marla's mentioned, today's subject is setting up a PC to run Donman, and then once we have Donman running on the computer, Murray will take you through setting up a user for Donman and some of the options that are available in there. Yeah. So, for most organizations or people, Donman will be sort of a standalone folder, which is either on your local machine or on a server somewhere or a NAS or something similar. So we go back to my desktop, and at the moment, if I go into this PC, and you'll see down here, I've got a drive mapped as the S drive, which is straight to the Donman folder. Pardon me. So in this case, that's on an external drive on the network that I've got here. But if I look at my local machine, at my C drive, I've also got a copy of Donman here. So in this case, the folder's just a slightly different name because it's more of my test environment. So the setup procedure is exactly the same, whether it's on the local machine or it's on the server. For all purposes, it's not a whole lot different. So if we have a look on the drive itself, so the basic structure that you'll see in this case, I've mapped the S drive straight to the Donman folder itself, but depending on your own setup, you might have S drive as apps and then Donman, or it might be a shared drive that has a whole lot of other folders where Donman is just one of those folders. It really doesn't matter as long as we sort of know where it's going to be set up. You can sort of get the workstation to sort of mimic those settings as we go through. So the main runtime file for Donman, if we have a look down our folder here, is this file called PFLN. So you can't just double click and run it because we need to set up a shortcut and we need to set up the actual path to the Donman folder in order to get things to run the way they should. The reason for that, if we go back to the top here, is because when we set the start in folder for Donman, we set it as the DM work folder on a standard installation. People may have their folders called different names if they're doing like multi-departments or multi-banking or multi-company. So, we can have one installation that maybe a couple of companies are sharing on the same server. So primarily, though, I'll concentrate on just DM work. So if I go into DM work, you'll see in DM work there's a data folder. So when we set up Donman, we say start in the data folder, and as such, the computer needs to be set up with the Donman folder in the path so that it can find the actual programs. So in the actual Donman folder itself, there's a file called the pfx-ini file, which is basically the main settings for Donman itself and starting up, etc. So in there, you'll see this line here, I'll highlight, is basically saying the data path is either dot, which in this case will be the DM work directory, 2 dots, which is one level up, and that'll be the Donman folder, or the data. So when we're running Donman, this is sort of telling it where the folders are that it's going to find the different components that are required. Okay. So if I were to just go through and say, oh, look, I'll do it like I would normally do, or what people would normally do, is they'll find the file, and we'll just double click on it, and that will try and run. So initially it looks all right, but then that'll then generate an error, because in this case it doesn't know where the actual data is, which is why we need to then set up a shortcut. So then you'll get this error here, which is saying trace back in file pfx trace.log. So the pfx trace.log is a file that is maintained by Donman itself on all the errors that it captures. So whether it be, we've lost the network connection, or there's an actual data problem or index problem in Donman, a program problem, whatever it may be, Donman will capture those messages and put them all into that trace log. And for people that have had errors before, they'll probably be aware of that particular file. Each error that goes in there will be unique to the circumstances that have caused the error. So if I click OK, that'll just throw me out, of course. So what I need to do first is create a shortcut to this program here. So if I do send to desktop, and then I can go back to my desktop. So then I'll have my shortcut here. But again, if I double click on that at the moment, because I haven't done any other setup, I'll get that same message that I did just then. So if I right click, go to properties. Okay. So here you can see it's starting in the S drive, and it's going to run this pfln.exe program. But what I need to do is add my DM work folder or my working folder to the shortcut itself. Okay. If your icon, at the moment, the icon that's showing will later on be the default Donman icon. If your icon's different, you can just click on the change icon button here and find an icon that's in the Donman folder, and you can use that. Otherwise, at the moment, it'll probably come up with the icon that has a blue circle with a yellow sort of swirl on it. Okay. So again, if I think at that point there, I've got my shortcut set up. I can then rename it, apart from my caps lock being on. Okay, so give it a nice name related to what the actual program is. But again, if I run it, I'll get an error message this time saying unable to open the pferror.dat file. Okay, so again, because I've set up the shortcut, but I haven't actually put the path in, it doesn't know where to find all of the different components that are required to run. In order to do that, and Windows 10 and Windows 7 very similar for this, very slight differences. Okay. So what we need to do is go into the control panel, and depending on your own network and restrictions and things, it may be something the IT administrators need to do. Obviously, if it's your own machine, you'll be able to do it yourself. So in this case, I've got an optional sort of add-on so that my Windows 10 has got the start button similar to what was under Windows 7. If you haven't, you'll still get the search down here. And if you typed control, you'll still be able to get to the control panel. Okay, so that will take us where we need to go. When you come in initially, you may find that your screen looks like this. So there's not a whole lot of options that we can utilize. Okay. Easier than having to go through and try and find the one you're looking for is if you go to category up here, change it to either small icons or large icons. We'll then show you all the different parts of the settings that you can do in Windows. Okay, so the one we're looking for is under System. So up to this point here, we're pretty much still the same as you would be in Windows 7. Okay, so Advanced System Settings. Okay, and then Environment Variables. So all of these steps exactly the same as Windows 7. The difference will be, and Murray will show you this later on Windows 7, it's just the way that path screen looks. So if I click on Environment Variables, and down the bottom half here, so at the top you'll see there's user variables, and if I have something up here, that will only be good while I'm the person logged in as the computer, like to the computer. If somebody else logs in, so I've got multiple people using the same machine, then the options that I put up here won't be available for everyone. So in order to make Donman more global, where someone else might end up using your machine, or if you get a different machine that can be passed to somebody else, the setting will be there. So down the bottom half of the screen, we have what's called the system variables. And the one we're looking for is called path. And if I double click on that, will show me, here's the things that come up automatically as part of the path. So it's basically saying, it's going to be able to find the Windows System 32, the Windows folder, the System 32, WBM. So basically all the components of Windows itself, so it can find the programs no matter where you're trying to run it from. So if I was just on the screen and I said, run Notepad, then Windows has already got the settings to be able to do that. For Windows 10, I then have to click on New, and that will put me onto the next line available. And in this case, because Donman is mapped straight to the root or the very first folder of the S drive, I just need to put that in. So if I add that, do OK, I can then just OK all the way out of there, close the control panel, and if I try my shortcut again, when it thinks about it, okay, so I'm now got Donman running, and I'm at the login screen as we go through. If I log in, okay, so everything's there. I can go and check my donors, my data, everything's pretty much where it needs to be. If you have something like QAS or the Data Tools RAT program that you need to do, they normally get installed on the local machine. Okay, but they will then integrate into Donman. As you can see at the moment down here, it's basically telling me that it loaded the rapid addressing tool, which allows me then to do that. So that's independent of whether I'm running it from the server or the local machine, whatever. The Data Tools program or the QAS program are normally installed on the local workstation so that we can get all of that working as we go through. So that's good for just setting up the actual program on the computer so Donman can run. The other thing we'd need to be wary of then is that if I have changed driver letters for some reason because things have changed on the server or whatever it may be, I need to go through those settings and update my path and update the shortcut to Donman itself. The other thing that will come up as a thing that we need to look at later is the actual Word documents that we're using for the mail merging. So with the receipt document or the reprint document or any of the other documents, because a lot of those have got the path to where the documents are going to be sort of hard-coded into them, we'd also need to modify those documents to tell it where to now pick up the data from. So if I go into Word, and when you're setting it up the first time, because we don't have to do a whole lot of changes, we just need to set it up like anything else. So if I go to Mailings, select Recipients, use existing list. Okay, so at the moment I'm going to my S drive, okay, my DM work folder, and then choosing whatever my file may be that I'm trying to use. So in this case, I'll just use the appeal text. The standard files are names.txt for the receipting, so it's onerec.txt for reprinting receipts. And when we create the mail merge file for doing an appeal or doing a selection of people, the default name is this appeal.txt file. Okay. So if I choose that and I've put all my fields in and I've done whatever I need to, okay, this will only work as long as the data is still on the same drive. If perchance my drive changes from the S drive to the P drive, for example, next time I open my document, the data will come up saying I can't find the data source, and you'll get the option to go through, and that will take you back to that same point where we'd say select recipients, use the existing list, and we may then go to the new location on the server. To do with the receipting is a little bit different because in the receipts there's two parts that are impacted by this. One is the actual data itself, so just names, addresses, all the receipting details, and the other one would be the field that comes up as part of the letter itself being inserted into the receipt. So for the letter that comes up as part of that, what you'd need to do is open your receipt document. And I'll just open, go back to my drive. Okay, so we can DM work. Okay, so if I've got my receipt document showing here, okay, so in this case I'd have to, so if I open that, and normally the receipt documents are set as read only, just so that people don't accidentally make a change and save the template, okay, because it's really just the layout of what the receipt's going to look like. It's not so much to do with the finished result. Okay, so you can see here it's now complaining that it can't find the data source. So this is the message that you'll get. So find data source, go back to the drive, that we've got, DM work, and in this case, as I mentioned before, the file for the receipts are called names.txt. Okay, so on this document, now that it's open, I've attached the data, but I've still got an error here saying error not a valid file name. In order to see that error, there's two things we can do. We can either push Alt F9 on the keyboard, which will put me into field view mode, or up the top here, if we go to more commands, so where your ribbon bar is, your quick access bar, if we go to more commands, and then all commands, when you're on that list, just click on the list anywhere and type a V, and that will take us down where we need to be. And there's one in here called View Field Codes. So if I add that, and OK, so I can now use this button to toggle the fields on and off. So fairly handy to have when you're doing that. But you can see at the moment, it's looking for the text or the letter to be on the C drive Donman. So this is where I then need to change this path here to reflect where things are on my actual server. Okay, so in this, I've then got DM work, and then I've got letters, and my documents are called docx. So if I were to do the merge now, that would be quite happy to go through. With this particular field, you do need to have 2 slashes in each of those. It does sound a bit counterintuitive when people look at it, but one of the switches, or one of the slashes, Word will ignore, and if you only put one in, it won't work at all. So because it ignores one of them. So if you put 2 slashes in, you can sort of go from there. If perchance you were using UNC pathing instead of having a drive mapped, etc., then you need to have 3 slashes in here, and sometimes 4 depending on the actual setup. Okay, but for a standard setup, it's pretty much like that, so that everything will tie up together. So in that case, I've then got my Donman system set up. It's using the drive and directory. I need to do the path when I set up that, and in my shortcut, I need to make sure that my shortcut has the DM work folder or my working folder as the start-in folder for that. In the receipt documents or any of the merge documents that we're using with that, I just need to make sure of the 2 things. One is that my data file, here, if I go to select recipients, edit recipients, down the bottom here, when you're on the edit recipients, we'll show you where the data is coming from and what it's called. So if there was ever a question about have I got the right file or whatever, you can look down here, and that'll then show you the actual source and the name of the file where it's coming from. So we can always see that. So as long as I do that and I do the path correctly on the field here, then my letters will sync up the same as the actual data for the names and addresses and all of the receipt details. So hopefully that's given a bit of insight into how to set Donman up from scratch. But if we needed to change it for any reason, I'll just close these at the moment, then I could do that as well. So if for some reason we said, okay, look, I've taken it off a network drive and I just wanted to put it on the local machine, then in here, my properties would then be pointing to the local machine rather than to the S drive. So I'll just quickly show you a shortcut of that. So if I were to go just to my local drive, and then, okay, so I've now got my PFLN file again. Okay, so if I send that to the desktop, and just put it next to the other one. So if I look at the properties, this one, okay, so you'll see the difference there. This one's now running from the C drive, and again, I'd need to put my working folder in. And then I'd need my path to be set up in order to find the files from the local drive rather than the network drive. And I'd also then have to make those same corresponding changes to the receipt documents or the other merged documents where the data's expected to be in a set location. Okay, so hopefully that's given a bit of an insight into setting up Donman. It's for most things, it's a fairly straightforward setup and shouldn't cause too many issues. But there's just a couple of steps involved for people who need to do it. And in the Donman folder itself, you will find documents related to setting them up. So if we I'll look at the local one. No, I probably won't have the on the local one because that's my test one. Okay, so in your folder, you should see, like in this case, there's Windows 7 setup, Windows 8, Windows 10, even older versions will have Windows Vista and Windows XP setup. So there's documents there that should show you the steps that I've gone through. So hopefully they will assist people in setting up a machine. And in this case, unlike most of the other help documents that we've got in Donman, these ones have been left as documents so that you could sort of capture the screens and change, the path locations, etc., to suit your own network. So if somebody else needed to set one up, they should be able to follow the instructions exactly as they're documented, not as the general instructions that we provide. Okay, so I'll hand over to Murray now, and he'll take you through setting up a user record for Donman and the options you've got available there.
Thanks, Gary. Now, before I actually start to look at the user setup, as Gary mentioned, I will actually show you what it looks like to set up the path under Windows 7. As he mentioned, sometimes this may not be available to you. You may need to get your IT administrator to do this for you, but depending on how you're set up, you may be able to do this yourself. So we simply go down to our Windows button, we go to Control Panel, we don't need anything special to get that. So I've got mine set up as category. As Gary showed you, you can change this up here to small or large icons, but we can go via System and Security. And then we go to System here. And then we're now in where Gary was on his, but he was on Windows 10. So we then go to Advanced System Settings. And again, we go to Environment Variables. Now, this is where it varies a little bit from the Windows 10 machine. We need to go down to System Variables, and we need to find that one called Path. So we've got here. Now, double-clicking it or selecting Edit will then allow us to edit it, but it's going to look different to how it was on Windows 10. If that's grayed out, then it means that you don't have the ability to do that. In some cases, you may not even be able to get this far within the steps. But assuming that you can get this far and you can click on Edit, what we have now is a variable with a value which needs where we need to make our modification. Now, in this case, I've already set this one up, but you can see here, I've got this D:/DMO7 test, which is my test environment for Donman. If you had this, say, in Gary's situation where he needed to add the S drive, you would need to make sure that there is a semicolon at the end. So you can see there's the semicolon after the word batch, but if that wasn't there, you need to add that yourself, and then you put the drive and directory to where your Donman is. So if this was Gary's machine running from the S drive, then what I'm doing there would be sufficient. So I can go OK to that, and again, I OK my way out, and that takes effect immediately. So fairly simple, a little bit more difficult than in Gary's one, and if you don't get it right, you'll get that same message as though you haven't got it set up. So when Gary did it before he set up the path, it came up with a message saying, I'm unable to open pferror.dat in brackets pfx.ini. That simply means that you just don't have the path set up, or at least not set up correctly. Okay, so let's get on now to how we can set up users. So we have this button down the bottom here that says User Setup. Now, this will work in one of two different ways, depending on whether you have got Donman admin rights or not. In order to set up new users, you do need those admin rights. And assuming that you've got those, I can click on that, and it will simply bring up the User System Setup screen. Now, if you find that you're in a situation where you don't have admin rights and you don't know anybody else who's got access to Donman, has admin rights, then you can log a support request and we can actually give you a login ID and password that will get you in for that day. All it will allow you to do will be to add or remove users. So you can't use it to access anything else in Donman, but it does allow you to create new user IDs. So if you're in that situation and you're stuck, then we can do that, and we could probably then change your user ID to become admin so that you would then be able to do that at any time that you like. If you're not an admin user, and you click on that user setup button, you will simply have the option of being able to change your password. So that's the only difference there. So in order to set up a new user, it's a little bit like setting up a new donor. When you want a new donor, you simply press enter on the donor number, and here with the users, it's very similar. You press enter on the user number, and it just generates whatever the next available number is. The username in Donman is either 2 or 3 characters. So typically it would be a person's initials, first and last initial, or if they have a middle initial, you can use that. Or you can make up something like VOL for volunteer, or TST for test, or XYZ. So I know I haven't got an XYZ user, so I'm just going to create one under that name. So this next field is where you would actually put whose person's name it is. So based on 2 or 3 characters, quite often it's difficult to know who a particular user was, especially if it was somebody who left the organization several years ago. But I'm just going to call this test user, and that's all it's used for. It's not actually going to be used pretty much anywhere else. All right, with this access level, in most organizations, you would simply either leave it blank for general access, or you could type in admin to make them an administrator. And that admin access, really, the only main difference here is that you can add or update existing users. If we take that off, there's very little that this user can do, that an admin can do that this one won't be able to do. When I press enter, it defaults to the minimum password length of 5. You can obviously increase that, but I wouldn't reduce it. 5 characters is probably fairly small. With the link to staff code, what you can do is you can actually have a staff code that's not specific to a particular person, so that this XYZ could be linked to a staff code for maybe your bequest officer or your major gift officer. And by doing that way, when you have refer to on a donor record, you can actually refer them to the bequest officer or the major donor officer, and that way, when that person changes, you don't have to go through and change all of those refer tos. You leave them as bequest officer, and you just change which of your users is linked to that particular code. Now, most of the time for organizations where they don't want to be specific about restricting access in any way, they want to give full access to everybody. Once you've typed in the access level or left it blank, normally at that stage you can simply click on Save User, and there's no operator code, so yes, we need to create it. If I say no, then it won't let me proceed. So I'll say yes to that, and it's now asking for a password, so I just make up a password for them, press enter, and type it in again. I don't know if I got that right. Okay, so it says password successfully saved. Press a key to continue, and I can do that. Now, in order to modify an existing user, perhaps to change what they have access to, then there's a number of different ways. If I know what their user ID is, I can type XYZ, and F3 is the find key, so I can just press F3 and that brings them up. If you're unsure of what their user ID is or whatever, you can simply page down through the different people that are on the system until you get to the one that you want, and there they are. So let's have a look at some of the restrictions and things that we can automatically start or not start based on the user. So the donor management diary, I think we've probably covered that in a previous webinar some time ago, but it basically allows you to have a list of people that you need to contact at various times, and when you need to make that contact, you can get it pop up on the screen, or you can interrogate a list and go, oh yes, in the next few weeks, these are the people I need to contact. So if you want that automatically started when you start Donman, you would simply tick this box here. A bit like with Outlook. If you don't start Outlook, then it can't give you the reminders. So if you don't start the donor management diary, it won't give you those reminders at the particular time you've specified. Gary mentioned a little bit about the barcoding software. So that is loaded on a PC by PC basis. But if you want that actually automatically loaded when you start Donman for that particular donor, for that user, then you need to tick that box. If you do tick that box and this person logs on to a PC that doesn't have the rapid addressing tool, you'll get a little error message when you first try and log into Donman. But apart from that, you just say, yep, that's fine, and you just won't be able to use the rapid addressing tool because you don't have it on that particular PC. By default, everyone should now, when you create a new one, get access to the user menu. The user menu just simply allows you to add menus and programs to one menu to save you jumping in and out of various menus. They'll all be on the one user menu, and it just makes it life easy to get between various places. Sometimes you want to restrict what people get access to, and there are two ways of accessing certain programs and menus. One of those is from the Start menu, which I'll have a quick look at the Start menu setup shortly, but that's where you've got, when you first log in, that's your Start menu. And so there are options on there to get you into housekeeping, into donation processing, etc., etc. And so you can actually restrict what people get access to from the Start menu. But you can also access all of those things plus more from the next menu or next tab across, which is the main menu tab. So if you want to purely stop people from using anything under the main menu, we can click on this option here to block access to the main menu. Then we can start looking at what access they have to the various things to do with the donors. So for instance, if we didn't want them to look at any of the notepads, we could tick the box here. Otherwise, we can tick hide pad 2, pad 3, or pad 4. We can tick any of those. And that would then mean that they couldn't get access to that. So let's suppose your pad 2 is something to do with them as a bequest prospect, and you only wanted access for that to perhaps your bequest officer. Then for everybody else, you would tick the box to say hide pad 2, and they would not be able to look at that confidential data. We can, over here, we've got these options for when you click on the dollar button and some of the other buttons, you can access various other bits and pieces of information. If we wanted to restrict, maybe they shouldn't get to see donations, we can then click on the donations button, or tickets, or if we didn't want them to be able to use some of these buttons that appear on the donor screen, we can tick the appropriate buttons. So for instance, you might like to do that for volunteers. They might only need access to one or two particular menus, and so you can restrict some of these options here to say, no, I don't want them looking at donor history or donations or any of those particular things that they don't need to know about. Over here we can say only show sales history. So donations would be hidden, but any sales you could see there. You can also give them access to the history, the summary history dashboard, or you can restrict that. So I think by default you don't get access to that, but if you do need to give that to them, simply tick that box. Now, by default, when you're in a donor screen, you can access any of the donor records. But again, maybe for volunteers or for certain people, you don't want them to access everybody. So you can actually set up what's called a filter, and filters can appear in a number of different programs throughout Donman. But you might say, look, I only want them to be able to look at individual records. I don't want them looking at corporate records or this, that, or the other. So in order to restrict what they get access to, we can set up a filter. Now, to set up the filter, where's the button for? There we go, down the bottom. Add, edit, create, filter. So if I want to create a filter to say, only allow access to donors where the donor type is I for individual. I can click on that. From the drop down here, I select donor type, which is this one here. So that's the one that says if they're an individual, etc., etc. In this case, I'm going to say must be equal to, and in the end there, I'm just going to type a capital I because that's the code I've got. And most importantly, I need to press enter in order for that to actually take effect. Now, I could also restrict it to say something like, let's say I had an extra code of major to denote my major donors. I could perhaps add a second code in there. So I could say in here, extra code Z, which is the combination of all eight extra codes into one. I'm going to say must not contain, and then major. And again, I need to press enter to make sure that that's there. So what that would mean is that if I set this filter against the XYZ user, they will only be able to look at people that have a donor type that is I for individual, but they don't have an extra code that has major. So I can save that, and I'll call that XYZ as a filter. Okay, accept that. And in here, oh, sorry, so I have to tick the box. And then in here, I can click on the, well, Shift F1 should give me the drop-down list. And so there's my filter, xyz.rst. And so once I've saved this, when this donor logs in, they will only be able to look at individuals. Okay. Down here, we've got a couple of buttons that we can set up on the actual donor screen, and I'll show you those. Generally speaking, under Modify System Defaults, you can set what these various buttons do, and typically they would run a donor management program of some sort that would normally work on one of the donors that you've selected. But on an individual user by user basis, you can actually change those to be different from the standard defaults. Most organizations don't tend to use those too much anyway, so it's probably not that big a deal. But if you did want to do that, then that's what you can do. So let me save this user. Okay, and I can now, the other thing that I need to show you is this start menu setup. So if I go into here, I need to find my donor again, XYZ. Okay, so start menu setup. So this is typically your start menu. Most of these things only have one option apart from the volunteer and the raffles, where they can also be used as user buttons. So you can see at the moment they've got a tick against everything, so they'll be able to do anything they like in terms of selecting menus. But if I say I don't want them to go into donation processing because, as a volunteer or someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, we don't want them to access that information. Or to even get into the options of perhaps being able to create a batch. So if I save that now and then escape out of there, save the user. If I now, is that saved? Okay, save now. If I escape out of here, I can use this log off button to log on as XYZ. And you can see that donation processing is grayed out. And if I try and click on it, it says it's disabled for this user. Okay, if I go into user setup, because XYZ is not an admin, then they get to type in their old password and then type in a new password. I don't want to do that. Let me go back and log in as myself for a short while. Okay, so I'm going to go back in here and show you something else that we can do with these access levels. Now I've got a person here who is volunteer, and you'll notice that I've got this access level of 1. We can set up various menus to require certain access levels. So I've got a couple of menus, I think donation processing and I think also donor appeals I've set up with a menu with a password of 9. Now, because this person doesn't have 9 in their access level, it means that if they try and use that, they will not be allowed to do that. So if I now log in, I've also got a filter here. In this case, I've only restricted it to just looking at individuals. I didn't put the extra little bit about the major donors. So if I now log in as Vol, I hope I've got the right password, and I do. So again, because I've disabled that from the start menu, I can't do that. But if I go into here, no, obviously that wasn't what I set up in my menu. If I go into System Utilities and type in today's password, I can actually have a look at menu definition. And looking at the main menu, see, I've got a number 3 on donation processing. Let's suppose I wanted to restrict them and say they can't get into the appeals. Then what I can do is I can actually change that line number 5, give it a menu, give it a password, and maybe I'll give it another number. I'll give it a 9. It doesn't really matter. So long as it's not a 1, then I can just get out of there and save that. Now I'll probably need to log off and log back in again to see. Okay. Or was it donor appeals? No. So let me log on again as Vol, because these things often have to log back in again before they take effect. No, mistyped it. Okay. No, maybe I'll have to have another look at that. But yeah, so once you've got that right, you can then restrict people, and so people with a number 1 could get into some menus, people with a number 9 could get into other menus, and so you have that ability to actually do a lot more from there. This is the user menu if you want people to get access to that. This is the main menu that I spoke of, so you can restrict what people get access to under the main menu. So let me just go back in. Oops, wrong place. Log back in as myself. So, yes, I'm too used to not having a password on my normal system. Okay, so back into user setup. If I want to delete somebody like that XYZ, once I've actually found them on the screen, like pretty much anything else in Donman, if I want to delete it, I can just go Shift F6 and they're gone. So that person can now no longer log on to the system. They're not a valid user. However, the user or the operator code that was set up is still valid, so that any donation record or donor record that has their user ID to say that they were the last person that saved it or they were the one that created that donation record, that is still going to be there. So there's no problems with that. So I'm going to finish there and hand it back to Marla for any questions that she has gathered along the way.
Great, thanks, Murray. As we mentioned at the start of the session, if you do have any questions, you just need to open the control panel to the right of the viewer window, type your question in the box provided, and then click on send. And we've got some minutes now to go through them. Just from the beginning, Gary, a question from Rita. What does PFLN stand for?
I don't think it stands for anything. It's the PowerFlex runtime file. So the language that Donman's written in is called PowerFlex, and it's just the name of the program that they've created. And all in the folder itself, all of the other files you see that'll have either a PTC and a PR3 extension are all the different components. So everything you click on in Donman and all the programs, etc., are all compiled in the language, and they all run from that PFLN. So it doesn't actually have a meaning itself.
If you've been using Donman, if you've been using Donman since the DOS days, they used to run something called PFL, and there's another one which is called PFLT. So I think that the T in the end may have some significance, but it's lost on us.
Awesome. That looks to be all the questions for the moment. Start the wrap up now, and if anyone does have any more questions, feel free to just drop them in as well. Just firstly, you'll find all our recordings of our webcasts on our website at donman.net.au under resources and recorded webcasts, or via the client support portal. So where you log your tech support inquiries, you'll find the recordings there as well. So our webcast today has been recorded and will be posted there shortly. Our next webcast is on the 11th of September, and it's going to cover internal security best practices. Details are on our website now, so you can register as well. And just finally, before you disconnect from our webcast today, we just ask that you take a few moments to complete our webcast survey that will pop up. It's just a few brief questions that will provide us with some valuable feedback on our webcast program. So thank you in advance for completing that. So there doesn't look to be any more questions today, Gary and Murray. So we'll close it off there. So thank
just
you.
one more thing
sure.
then. Yeah,
yep.
we have had a request for someone in an organisation in Sydney who is looking for some training in the near future. So if there's anybody else who is also considering that, you can get in touch with our office and talk to Jen on 0398697500, and we can sort of arrange the on-site training from there.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Gary. And again, so just thank you, Gary and Murray, for today's webcast, and thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your afternoon to join us. So that concludes our webcast for today. We look forward to seeing you next month. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Bye for now.